Chapter 28 Sought Out. With untiring astuteness, I watched every moment of the newcomer, but detected nothing suspicious in his actions. We lunched together, only 5 of us, the others being away at Doddington, and were a merry party. The man with the small eyes was excellent company, full of witty sayings and droll stories, and was really an acquisition to our party. Yet I noticed that he spoke little with Beryl, as though some secret understanding existed between them, and when he did address her, she answered him vacantly, as though her thoughts were afar off. That night, on the return of the party from the flower show, his arrival was hailed with delight. At all events, he was a very popular person at Atworth. He seemed rejuvenated since we had last met, and appeared fully 20 years younger than on the night when he had tempted me. I had many chats with him. I played him at billiards, and was afterwards his partner at whist before we parted for the night. I did this in order to put him off his guard, if possible, and to induce him to believe that I had not recognized him. I had not yet decided how to act. When at midnight I left my companions, entered my room, and closed the door, that strange, weird influence again made itself upon me. My lower limbs became benumbed, and my blood seemed frozen in my veins. I stood glancing around the bedroom in fear and wondering. There was nothing supernatural there, and yet this unseen influence was as the finger of evil. The strange sensation was not of long duration, though gradually faded until I found myself in my normal state. I tested my temperature with my thermometer, and saw that I had just a slight tendency to fever, due, I suppose, to alarm and excitement. Then, having satisfied myself that my motor nerves, which had become partially paralyzed, had regained their strength, and that the sensitive portion of the spinal nervous system that had been affected had returned to its normal capacity, I turned in and tried to sleep. I say tried to sleep, but I think, if the truth were told, I did not try. My brain was too perturbed by the events of that day. Beneath that very roof the tempter was actually sleeping. I had shaken his hand and played billiards with him. Truly, I had been patient in my efforts to analyze and dissect the various complications of that extraordinary mystery. At sunrise I dressed, and on stepping from my room out into the fresh air of the corridor, I again felt that bewildering influence upon me quite distinctly, yet not so strong as to cause me any inconvenience. The feeling was a kind of cold, creepy one, without any sudden shock. During the day I lounged at Beryl's side, endeavouring to obtain from her the truth of her midnight escapade, but she would tell me absolutely nothing. The man who had posed as her father was undoubtedly her enemy, and she held him in deadly fear. It was this latter fact that caused me at last to make a resolution, and in the idle hour before the dressing bell went for dinner, I contrived to stroll alone with him out across the park. With a good cigar between his lips, he walked as jauntily as a man of 20, notwithstanding his grey hairs. He laughed and chatted merrily, recounting to me all the fun of last year's house-party, with its ill-natured chatter and its summer flirtations. Suddenly, when we were a long way from the house, skirting the quiet lake that lay deep in a hollow surrounded by a small wood, I turned to him resolutely, saying, "Do you know that I have a distinct recollection that we have met before?" He started almost imperceptibly, and glanced at me quickly with his small round eyes. "I think not," he answered. "Not at least to my knowledge." "Defects of memory are sometimes useful," I replied. "Cannot you recall the, 24th of July?" "The 24th of July?" he repeated reflectively. "No, there is no event that fixes the date in my memory." His face had grown older. The light youthfulness had gone out of it, leaving it the grey ashen countenance of the tempter. "You were in London on that date," I asserted. "No, I was in Alexandria. I sailed from there on the 22nd. "Then, at the outset, you deny that you were in London on the date I have mentioned? Good. Well, I will go a step further in order to refresh your memory. On that July night you met your friend, Tatterset." "My dear fellow," he cried, laughing outright, "I've no idea what you're driving at. Have you taken leave of your senses?" "No," I answered angrily. "I have not, fortunately for myself. Therefore it is useless to deny the truth." "I am not denying the truth," he replied. "I am denying the extraordinary assertion you are making." "Because you fear to face the truth." "I fear nothing. he responded defiantly. "What in heaven's name have I to fear?" "The consequences of a cleverly planned conspiracy against myself." He smiled superciliously and answered, "I don't understand you. What conspiracy?" "Listen," I cried furiously. "It is useless for you to affect either ignorance or indifference. This is no case of mistaken identity. You forget that I am a medical man, and that my eye can detect a mark upon the flesh where the layman sees nothing. A crinkled depression on the inside of your wrist is a mark left in infancy. It cannot be imitated, neither can it be obliterated. You may alter your facial expression or the outline of your figure, but you cannot alter that." He glanced at his wrist, and I saw that he had never before noticed the indelible mark upon the flesh. "You bore that mark on the day we met 3 months ago, and you bear it now," I went on. "Do you still deny your presence in London on the date I have mentioned?" "Of course I do," he said. "Then you are a liar, and I will treat you as such," I responded firmly. We were standing there facing one another, and I saw in his eyes an evil glint which told me plainly that he was no mean antagonist. "You pay me a compliment," he said coolly. "I cannot see what motive you have in thus insulting me." "It is no insult," I cried. "You are my enemy. You and your accomplice Tatterset devised an ingenious trap, and then called me in for professional consultation. The trap was well baited, and as you intended, I fell into it. I thank God for one thing, namely that I did not commit murder at your instigation." He smiled again, but no word escaped him. "You cannot think that I am in ignorance of the plot, or that I am unaware that, owing to the deception you have practiced upon me, Beryl Wynd is my wife." "And what connection have I with all this?" he demanded. "If Beryl Wynd is your wife, what is it to do with me, pray?" "The marriage was effected by conspiracy," I answered. "She was your victim, just as I unfortunately was. The penalty for such conspiracy is penal servitude." "Well?" he inquired, smiling again. "And I take it that you suspect me of being implicated in the conspiracy? All I can reply is that you are entirely mistaken." "I am not mistaken," I said hotly. "It was yourself who tempted me, holding the banknotes in your hand. And if you consented, as you allege, you became equally implicated in the conspiracy," he observed, interrupting me. I had never before looked at the matter in such a light. His words were true. I had sold myself to the conspirators, had become an accessory, and was therefore just as liable to prosecution as they were. "You attempted to suborn me to commit murder," I added. "It's a lie," answered the tempter flatly. "But I can prove it," I asserted. "How?" "I have proof," I replied ambiguously, for I did not intend to show my hand. "Then you are at liberty to use it for whatever purpose you like," he answered defiantly. "But we were alone." "Ah!" I exclaimed quickly. "Then you admit your identity?" "I admit nothing." "Until I can show proof positive, huh? Until I can bring those who will bear witness that on the 24th of June you were at number 94 Queensgate Gardens, that you sent for me, that on my arrival you tempted me to marry Beryl Wynd, that you accompanied me to the church of St. Anne's, and that, having accepted the promise of payment, you afterwards attempted to induce me to take her life." "Lies, all of it." "We shall see. You tried to take my life. Revenge is now mine," I added in a hard, distinct voice. It may have only been my fancy, yet I could not help noticing that the word revenge caused him to shrink and regard me with some misgiving. "How?" he inquired. "No," I responded firmly. "We are enemies, that is sufficient. I have discovered the whole plot, therefore rest assured that those who victimized both Beryl and myself, and have made dastardly attempts upon our lives, shall not go unpunished." I had altered my tactics, deeming it best to assume a deeper knowledge of the affair than that which I really possessed. It was a delicate matter. This accusation must be dealt with diplomatically. "My private opinion of you, sir, is that you are a confounded fool," he said. "I may be," I responded, "but I intend that you, who enmeshed me into your plot of a defenseless woman, and who abducted me aboard so cleverly in order to gain time shall bear the exposure and punishment that you merit." He nodded slowly as though perfectly comprehending my meaning. "Then I shall take it that Beryl is aware of your actual alliance with her?" he asked, his small eyes flashing at me. But I made no satisfactory answer. I was wary of him, for I knew him to be a clever miscreant. His tone betrayed an anxiety to know the exact extent of Beryl's knowledge. "Beryl is my wife, and my interests are hers," I replied. "It is sufficient that I am aware of the whole truth." "You think so?" he laughed with sarcasm. "Well, you are at liberty to hold your own opinion." "The fact is," I said, "that you accepted Sir Henry's invitation here, never dreaming you would come face to face with me. I'm the last person in the world you desired to meet." "The encounter has given me the utmost pleasure, I assure you," he replied with a sneer. "Just as it will not only to yourself, but to a certain other." "Who?" "A person whom you know well, an intimate friend of yours." "I don't follow you." "It is a woman. Think of your female friends." "What is her name?" "La Gioia." "La Gioia!" he gasped, glaring at me. His face was livid and his surprise apparent. I saw that he had never dreamt that I knew of her existence. "You see, I may be a confounded fool, as you have declared," I said, "but I have not been idle these past few months. La Gioia's revenge is mine also." He made no response. My words had, as I intended, produced an overwhelming effect upon him. He saw that if La Gioia's secret was out, he stood in deadliest peril. I had impressed him with an intimate knowledge of the whole affair. It was at that moment he showed himself full of resourceful villainy. "The vengeance of La Gioia will fall upon the woman who is your wife, not upon yourself." "And through whom?" I cried. "Why, through yourself and your accomplice Tatterset, who betrayed Beryl into her hands. The mystery of Witten is to me no mystery, for I know the truth." He glared at me as though I were some evil vision, and I knew that by these words I was slowly thrusting home the truth. "What have I to do with the affair at Witten?" he cried. "I know nothing of it." "I may perhaps be enabled to prove differently," I said. "Do you then allege that I am implicated in the Colonel's death?" he exclaimed furiously. "I have my own opinion," I responded. "Remember that you made a desperate and dastardly attempt to kill me, fearing lest I should denounce you as having tried to bribe me to commit murder." His eyes glittered, and I saw that his anger was unbounded. We stood there in the calm sunset near the lake, and I could see that he would rid himself of me, if such a course were possible. But I thought of Beryl. Oh, how I loved her! That she had fallen a victim to the cleverly contrived conspiracy incensed me, and I resolved to show the scoundrel no quarter. "Well," he said at last, in a tone of defiance, "after all these wild allegations, what can you do? Surely you do not think that I fear any statement that you can make." "You may not fear any statement of mine, but I do not anticipate that you will invite La Gioia to reveal all she knows. The latter might place you in enforced confinement for a few years." "La Gioia is at liberty to say whatever she likes," he answered. "If she is actually a friend of Beryl's, she will no doubt assist you, but at present she is her deadliest antagonist. Therefore, if you take my advice, you'll just calm yourself and await another opportunity for revenge at a later date." His cool words caused my blood to boil. "You treat this affair as though it were a matter of little importance, sir," I cried. "Let me tell you, however, that I have been your victim, and I intend to probe the matter to the bottom and ascertain your motives." "That you'll never do," he laughed. "I tell you I will," I cried. "I am Beryl's husband, and she is no longer defenseless. You have to answer to me." "I've answered you by saying that in future you are at liberty to act as you think fit. I merely warn you that La Gioia is no more your friend than she is your wife's." "You contrive to entrap me into marriage. Why? Answer me that question," I demanded. "I refuse. You have threatened me with all sorts of pains and penalties, but I defy you." From his silver case he took a cigar, and, biting off the end, leisurely lit it. His countenance had changed. Again it was the same grey, sinister face that had so long haunted me in my dream, the face of the tempter. "Have you finished?" he asked with mock politeness. "For the moment, yes," I answered, "but yours is an ill-advised defiance, as you will very soon see." He burst forth into a peal of strange, unnatural laughter, whereat I turned upon my heel and left him standing there, a dark silhouette in the crimson sunset. Blindly I walked on to the house, dressed mechanically, and descended late for dinner. But the tempter was not in his place. He had been called away to London, it was said, and had been compelled to catch the 7:30 train from Corsham. I glanced at my watch. It was already 7:35. I had blundered and had allowed him to slip through my fingers. I bit my lip in mad vexation. Beryl's beautiful eyes were fixed upon me, and in her face I detected deep anxiety. She looked perfectly charming in a gown of pale pink crêpe de chine. Had he sought her before departure, I wondered? "It's an awful disappointment that he has to leave," said the baronet's wife. "I endeavoured to persuade him to remain until the morning, but he received a letter by the afternoon post making it imperative that he should return to London, but he says he will be back again either on Monday or Tuesday." "I do hope he will return," observed someone at the end of the table, and then the subject dropped. When the ladies had left the room, Sir Henry remarked, "Queer fellow, Ashwick. A bit eccentric, I always think. His movements are most erratic, a regular rolling stone." I embraced that opportunity to inquire regarding his antecedents, but my host appeared to know very little beyond the fact that he was wealthy, good company, a keen sportsman, and moved in a very smart set of town. "I've known him a couple of years or so. He's a member of my club," he added. "My wife declares that none of the parties are complete without him." "Do you know his friend Tatterset? Major Tatterset?" "No," responded Sir Henry. "Never met him." With the others I went along to the drawing-room and found Beryl alone in a cosy corner, obviously awaiting me. She twisted a lace scarf about her shoulders, and we strolled out upon the terrace, as was our habit each evening, if fine and starlit. When we had gained the further end, she suddenly halted, and turning to me, said in a low, husky voice that trembled with emotion, "Dr. Colkirk, you have deceived me." "Deceived you, Miss Wind?" I exclaimed, taken completely aback by her allegation. "How?" "I know the truth, a truth that you cannot deny. I am your wife." "I do not seek to deny it," I answered in deep, solemn earnestness, taking her small white hand in mine. "It is true, Beryl, that you are my wife. True also that I love you." "But it cannot be possible," she gasped. "I knew that I was a wife, but never dreamed that you were actually my husband." "And how did you discover it?" "I was down by the waterside this evening before dinner, and overheard your conversation with Mr. Ashwick." "All of it?" "Yes, all of it. I know that I am your wife." And she sighed while her hand trembled within mine. "I love you, Beryl," I said simply and earnestly. "I've known all along that you were my wife, yet I dared not tell you so, being unable to offer sufficient proof of it, and unable to convince you of my affection. Yet in these few weeks that have passed, you have surely seen that I am devoted to you, that I love you with a strange and deeper love than ever any man has borne within his heart. 1,000 times I have longed to tell you this, but have always feared to do so. The truth is that you are my wife, my adored." Her hand tightened upon mine, and unable to restrain her emotions further, she burst into tears. "Tell me, darling," I whispered into her ear. "Tell me that you will try to love me now that you know the truth. Tell me that you will forgive me for keeping the secret until now, for, as I will show you, it was entirely in our mutual interests. We have both been victims of a vile and widespread conspiracy. Therefore we must unite our efforts to combat the vengeance of our enemies. Tell me you will try and love me, nay, that you do love me a little. Give me hope, darling, and let us act together as man and wife." But it is so sudden," she faltered. I I hardly know my own feelings." "You know whether you love me or whether you hate me," I said, placing my hand around her slim waist and drawing her towards me. "No," she responded in a low voice. "I do not hate you. How could I?" "Then you love me? You really love me after all?" For answer she burst again into a flood of tears, and I, with mad passion, covered her white brow with hot kisses while she clung to me. My love, my wife. Oh, when I reflect upon the ecstasy of those moments! How I kissed her sweet lips, and she in return responded to my tender caresses, how she clung to me as though shrinking in fear from the world about her, how her heart beat quickly in unison with my own. I feel that I cannot properly convey the sufficient sense of my wild delight. It is enough to say that in those tender moments I knew that I had won the most beautiful and graceful woman that I had ever beheld, a woman who was peerless above all, and that she was already my wife. The man who reads this narrative, and whose own love has been reciprocated after long waiting, as mine has been, can alone understand the blissful happiness that came to me and the complete joy that filled my heart. We stood lost in the ecstasies of each other's love, heedless of time, heedless of those who might discover us, heedless of everything. The remembrance of that hour remains with me today like a pleasant dream, a foretaste of the bliss of paradise. Many were the questions that I asked and answered, many of our declarations of affection and of fidelity. Our marriage had been made by false contract on that fateful day months before, but that night, beneath the shining stars, we exchanged solemn vows before God as man and wife. I endeavoured to obtain from her some facts regarding Ashwick and his accomplice Tattersett, but what she knew seemed very unsatisfactory. I related to her the whole of the curious circumstances of our marriage, just as I had recounted it in the opening chapters of my narrative, seeking neither to suppress nor exaggerate any of the singular incidents. Then, at last, she made a confession, a strange, amazing confession which held me dumb. Chapter 29. Put to the Test. "I remember very little of the events of that day," my love said with some reluctance. "I know Ashwick, he having been a guest here last year, and a frequent visitor at Gloucester Square. With Nora and Sir Henry I returned to London in early May after wintering in Florence, and one morning at the end of June I met Major Tattersett unexpectedly in the Burlington. He told me that his sister and niece from Scotland were visiting him at his house in Queensgate Gardens, and invited me to call and make their acquaintance." "Had you ever been to his house previously?" "Never. He, however, gave me an invitation to luncheon for the 24th of July, which I accepted. On arrival I found the Major. His sister and his niece were out shopping, therefore I sat alone awaiting them in the drawing-room, when all of a sudden I experienced for the first time that curious sensation of being frozen. I tried to move, but was unable. I cried out for help, but no one came. My limbs were stiff and rigid as though I were struck by paralysis, while the pain was excruciating. I fought against unconsciousness, but my last clear recollection of those agonizing moments was of an indistinct, sinister face peering into mine. All then became strangely distorted. The balance of my brain became inverted, and I lost my willpower, being absolutely helpless in the hands of those who directed my movements. I could not hold back, for all my actions were mechanical, obeying those around me. I remember being dressed for the wedding, the journey to the church, my meeting with my future husband, whose face, however, I was unable to afterwards recall, the service and the return. Then came a perfect blank. "And afterwards?" "Night had fallen when I returned to my senses, and the strange sensation of intense cold generally left me. I looked around, and to my amazement saw the pale moon high in the sky. My head was resting upon something hard, which I gradually made out to be a wooden seat. Then, when I sat up, I became aware of the bewildering truth. I was lying upon one of the seats in Hyde Park." "In Hyde Park? And you had been placed there while in a state of unconsciousness?" "Yes. Upon my finger I found a wedding ring. Was it possible, I wondered, that I was actually married to some unknown man? You saw nothing of Ashwick? I saw no one except the maidservant who showed me into the drawing-room, and cannot in the least account for the strange sensation which held me helpless in the hands of my enemies. I saw the man I married at the church, but so mistily that I did not recognize you when we met again. But you knew the house in Queensgate Gardens. Did you not afterwards return there and seek an explanation of Tatterset? On discovering my whereabouts, I rose and walked across the park to Gloucester Square. It was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning, but Nora was sitting up in anxiety as to what had become of me. I had, however, taken the ring from my finger, and to her told a fictitious story of the account of my tardy return. 2 days later I returned to the house to which Tatterset had invited me, but on inquiry found to my amazement that it was really occupied by a lady named Stenterford, who was abroad, while the man left in charge knew nothing whatever either of the Major or of his sister and niece. I told him how I had visited there 2 days previously, but he laughed incredulously, and when I asked for the maidservant who had admitted me, he said that no maid had been left there by Mrs. Stenterford. In prosecution of my inquiries, I sought to discover the register of my marriage, but, not knowing the parish in which it had taken place, my search at Somerset House was fruitless. They told me that the registers were not made up there until 6 months or so after the ceremony. You did not apply at Doctors' Commons? No, she responded. I thought the entry would be at Somerset House. What previous knowledge had you of the Major? He was a friend of Ashwick's who had been introduced to us one night in the stalls at Daly's. He afterwards dined several times at Gloucester Square. But Sir Henry does not know him. It was while he was away at the Cape. Then you have not the faintest idea of the reason of our extraordinary marriage, darling? I asked, holding her hand. I have told you all that actually occurred. Can you form no conclusion whatever as to the motive? Absolutely none, she answered. I am as utterly in the dark as yourself. I cannot understand why you were selected as my husband. But you do not regret? I asked tenderly. Regret? No, she repeated, raising her beautiful face to mine, perfect in its loveliness and purity. I do not regret now, Richard, because I love you. And our lips met again in fervent tenderness. It is still an absolute mystery, I observed at last. We know that we are wedded, but there our knowledge ends. We have both been victims of a plot, she responded. If we could but discern the motive, then we might find some clue to lead us to the truth. But there is a woman called La Gioia, I said, and continuing explained my presence in the park at Whitton, and the conversation I had overheard between herself and Tatterset. Her hand still in mine trembled perceptibly, and I saw that I had approached a subject distasteful to her. Yes, she admitted at last in a hard, strange voice. It is true that he wrote making an appointment to meet me in the park that night. I kept it because I wished to ascertain the truth regarding my marriage, but he would tell me nothing. He only urged me to secure my own safety because La Gioia had returned. And who is La Gioia? My enemy, my bitterest enemy. Can you tell me nothing else? I asked in a tone of slight reproach. I know nothing else. I do not know who she is, or what she is, or where she lives. I only know she is my unseen evil genius. But you have seen her. She called upon you that evening at Gloucester Square when she assumed the character of your dressmaker, and a few nights ago she was here, in this house. Here! She echoed in alarm. Impossible! Then I related to her how I had seen her, and how her evil influence had fallen upon me afterwards when I had entered the room. The thing is actually beyond belief, she declared. Do you really think you were not mistaken? Most assuredly I was not. It was the woman who had called upon you in London, but you have not told me the reason you were absent from your room that night. She was silent for a few moments, then answered, I met Tatterset. He demanded that I should meet him, as he wished to speak with me secretly. I did so. Why did he wish to see you? In order to prove to me that he had no hand in the tragic affair at Whitton. I had suspected all along that he was responsible for the Colonel's death, and my opinion has not altered. I begged him to tell me the reason of the plot against me, the motive of my marriage and the identity of my husband, but he refused point blank, telling me to ask La Gioia, who knew everything.
Have you no idea of her whereabouts?
None whatever.
If we could but find her, I said. She might tell us something. If we could but find her.
My love was trembling. Her heart was filled to overflowing with the mystery of it all. Yet I knew that she loved me. Yes, she loved me. How long we lingered there upon the terrace I know not, but it was late ere we re-entered the drawing-room. Who among those assembled guests would have dreamt the truth? We were man and wife. As I went upstairs, I found a letter lying upon the hall table, in the place where the guests' letters were placed. Barton had, I suppose, driven into Corsham and brought with him the mail which would, in the usual course, have been delivered on the following morning. The note was from Hofer, a couple of awkwardly scribbled lines asking me to come and see him without a moment's delay. Eager to hear whether the queer old fellow had made any discovery, I departed next morning by the 8 o'clock express for London, having left a note with Verrill's maid explaining the cause of my sudden journey, and soon after 11 was seated with the old German in his lofty laboratory. The table was, as usual, filled with various contrivances, bottles of liquids and test tubes containing fluids of various hues, while before him, as I entered, a small tube containing a bright blue liquid was bubbling over the spirit lamp, the heat causing the colour to gradually fade.
"Ah, mein friend," he said with a strong accent, holding out his big fat hand encased in a stout leather glove. "I am glad you have come, very glad. It has been a long search, but I have discovered something after all. You see these?" Then he indicated his formidable array of retorts and test tubes. "Well, I have been investigating at Gloucester Square, and have found the affair much more extraordinary than I believed."
"And you have discovered the truth?" I demanded.
"Yes," he responded,
turning down the flame of the lamp and bending attentively to the bubbling fluid from which all colour had disappeared while I had been watching.
"Shall I relate to you the course of my investigations?"
"Please do. I am all attention."
"Well,"
he said, leaning both elbows upon the table and resting his chin upon his hands, while the tame brown rat ran along the table and scrambled into his pocket. "On the first evening you sought my assistance, I knew, from the remote effects which both of us experienced, that evil influence of that mysterious visitor in black was due to some unknown neurotic poison. It was for that reason that I was enabled to administer an antidote without making an exact diagnosis. Now, as you are well aware, toxicology is a very strange study. Even common table salt is a poison and has caused death. But my own experiments have proved that, although the various narcotic poisons produce but little change, the remote effects are very remarkable. Certain substances affect certain organs in particular. The remote action of a poison may be said to be due in every instance to its absorption into the veins or lymphatics, except when there is a direct continuity of effect traceable from a point where the poison was applied to the point where the remote effect is shown. It is remarkable that the agents which most affect the nervous system do not act at all when applied to the brain or trunks of nerves. Poisonous effects result from absorption of the poisoning body, and absorption implies solution. The more soluble, therefore, the compound is, the more speedy are its effects. Do you follow me?
Quite clearly.
The rapid remote effect produced on leaving that room made it plain that I must look for some powerful neurotic poison that may be absorbed through the skin, he went on. For this object I searched microscopically various objects within and without the room, but for a long time was unsuccessful, when, one morning, I made a discovery that upon the white porcelain handle of the door a little colourless liquid had been applied. Greater part of it had disappeared by constant handling, but there was still some remaining on the shaft of the handle, and the microscope showed distinct prism-shaped crystals. All these I secured, and with them have since been experimenting. I found them to be a more deadly poison than any of the known pearlescents or hypothenescents, with an effect of muscular paralysis very similar to that produced by curare, combined with the stiffness about the neck and inability to move the jaw so apparent in symptoms provoked by strychnia. The unknown substance, a most deadly secret poison, and, as I have since proved, one of those known to the ancients,
had been applied to the door handle on the inside, so that any person in pulling open the door to go out must absorb it in sufficient quantity to prove fatal. Indeed, had it not been for the antidote of chlorine and the mixed oxides of iron which I fortunately hit upon, death must have ensued in the case of each of us. Now, to determine exactly what was the poison used was an almost insurmountable task, for I have never met with the substance before. But after working diligently all this time, I have found that by treating it with sulphuric acid it underwent no change, yet by changing a fragment of the bicarbonate of the potassium a series of blue, violet, and red tints were produced, very similar to those seen in tests for strychnia. The same results were brought about also by peroxide of lead and black oxide of manganese. I dried the skin of a frog and touched it with a drop of solution containing a single one of the tiny crystals, when strong tetanic convulsions ensued and the animal died in 10 seconds. At last, however, after many other experiments, the idea occurred to me that it was an alkaloid of some plant unknown in modern toxicology. I was, of course, aware of the action of the calabar bean of the west coast of Africa, the akazga, the datura seeds of India, and such like poisons, but this was certainly none of these. It was a substance terribly deadly, the only substance that could strike death through the cuticle. Utterly unknown to us, yet the most potent of all secret poisons. And how did you determine it at last? By a reference I discovered in an ancient Latin treatise on poisons from the old monastery at Pavia, now in the British Museum. It gave me a clue which ultimately led me to establish it as an alkaloid of the Vajana bean. The bean, it appears, was used in the 10th and 11th centuries by a sect of the despotic Arab mystics called the Fatimites, who had made Cairo their capital, and held rule over Syria as well as the northern coast of Africa. The last Fatimite was, at a later date, dethroned by Saladin, conqueror of the Kurds, and who opposed Richard I of England. The poison, introduced from Egypt into Italy, was known to the old alchemists as the most secret means of ridding one of undesirable acquaintances. Its effect, it was stated, was the most curious of any known drug, because, for the time being, it completely altered the disposition of the individual and caused him to give way to all sorts of curious notions and delusions, while at the same time he would be entirely obedient to the will of any second person. Afterwards came fierce delirium, a sensation as though the lower limbs were frozen, complete loss of power, exhaustion, and death. But in modern toxicology even the name of the Vajana was lost. My first step, therefore, was to seek assistance of the great botanist who is the curator of Kew Gardens, and after considerable difficulty and many experiments, we both arrived at the conclusion that it was the bean of a small and very rare plant peculiar to the oasis of the Ahir in the south of the Great Sahara. At Kew there was a stunted specimen, but it had never borne fruit. Therefore we both searched for any specimen that might exist in England. We heard of one in the wonderful gardens of La Mortella, near Mentone, and after a diligent inquiry discovered that a firm of importers in Liverpool had sold a specimen with the beans in pod, which was delivered to a person named Turton living in Bishopswood Road, Highgate, and planted in a small greenhouse there. I have not been idle, he added with a grin. Then, taking from a drawer in the table before him a photograph, he handed it to me, saying, I have been able to obtain this photograph of Mrs. Turton, the lady who purchased the plant in question. He held it out to me, and in an instant I recognized the face. It was that of the woman who had crept so silently through the rooms at Atworth, La Gioia. Briefly I told him all that had transpired on that night, and declared that I recognized her features, whereat he grunted in satisfaction. You have asked me to try and solve the mystery, and I have done so. You will find this woman living at a house called Fairmead in a road I have indicated. I have not only established the cause of the phenomenon, but I have, at the same time, rediscovered the most extraordinary and deadly substance known in toxicology. As far as the present case is concerned, my work is finished. I have succeeded in making some of the Vajana alkaloid. Here it is. And, taking a small yellow glass tube, securely corked and sealed, he handed it to me. In the bottom I saw half a grain of tiny white crystals. I knew now why he was wearing gloves in his laboratory. And have you seen this woman? I asked the queer old fellow whose careful investigations had been crowned with such success. How did you know on the following day that it was La Gioia who had come in the guise of a dressmaker? I have seen her, and I have seen the plant. It is from one of the beans which I secured secretly that I have been able to produce that substance. I knew her by overhearing a conversation between Miss Wind and her cousin on the following morning."
"And the woman is ignorant that you know the truth?"
"Entirely. I have finished. It is for you now to act as you see fit."
I expressed admiration for his marvelous patience and ingenuity in solving the mystery, and when I left it was with the understanding that, if I required his further assistance, he would willingly render it.